Hello, I'm Miriam and welcome to the 8th Annual Football Writing Festival. We've got a whole series of events both at the National Football Museum and online, and if you check out the description below, you can see a full programme for the week. We're really excited to share all these writers and their featured books with you, and today we are joined by Musa Okwonga, who's going to be talking to us about his new release, Striking Out, which he co-wrote with Ian Wright, so enjoy. So Musa, welcome to the Football Writing Festival. Can you tell me a bit about your book first and how it all started with the book, really?
Sure, yeah. So the book is called Striking Out. Came out with Scholastic Books. Shout out to Leah James, who commissioned it. And it is a collaboration with the great Mr. Ian Wright, who I'm proud to call a friend, and just an amazing human being. So this book came out a couple of months ago now. And the idea behind Striking Out, it actually came on the back of Ian doing Desert Island Discs on the BBC with Lauren Laverne, I think it was. And response to that was incredible. Like, people were like pulling over their cars to listen to it. People like in tears listening to it. And it was basically Ian going through, I think it's 8 songs that he goes through, which basically soundtrack his life. And he talks about all things he experienced, emotional, physical abuse in his own home, the drama of making it, but scared he wasn't going to make it. So he talks about that on Desert Island Discs. And there was a plan initially to write a story about his life for children. And in the meetings, I was like, hang on a minute. A couple of us were saying, the thing is, people kind of know Ian's life story. So if we do that again, it's like what they already know, but just for children. Why don't we do a story about Ian as he is now? And people already know Ian behind the scenes, and that's, he's a public figure, but Ian the mentor, Ian the uncle, as they call him affectionately, Ian as the father, Ian as the man in his mid-50s, the former elite footballer who can pass on that wisdom, because a lot of these elite players still contact Ian, like Romelu Lukaku gets in touch with Ian now and again to talk about football and finishing. So the idea was to kind of take Ian as he is now and put him in a fictional scenario where he was mentoring the Ian Wright of the day. So we thought, where would that Ian Wright be? If that Ian Wright was basically like living in Hackney, listening to Jay Huss on social media, what would Ian Wright today look like? And that was kind of how we went with it.
So going back, you just dropped in that Ian is your mate. How did you become friends with Ian Wright, first of all?
It's been a really beautiful thing. So I think the reason I mentioned it is because the book would not have happened if Ian wasn't a friend. And I say that because you have to write a book with someone, you've got to get to observe them, their vocal patterns, their behavioural patterns, all the rest of it. And so I do this football podcast called Stadio, and we started out doing it. Ryan Hunn, shout out to him, he's an absolute genius. I started working with Ryan on this podcast, and we were thinking of conceptual ideas, and we thought, well, for us, football is an art form, and finishing is an art form within football. And we just thought we'd do a small series on the art of finishing, and just actually ask elite former players about how they played and how they finished. So Ian had actually been in touch with me for about a year before that, because he'd started reading some of my essays about politics, because I write political commentary as well. He started reading that stuff, and he was like, I really enjoy your political essays. And so I was like, you know what, I said, Ryan, why don't I just ask Ian if he could do an interview? Didn't know him at all. Takes us to the Emirates. We watch Arsenal Victoria together. Pepe scores a last-minute winner from a free kick. Me, him and Ryan hang out. We do this interview, and he gives us an incredible interview. And that's kind of where the friendship began. And then over time, we just stayed in touch. We ended up doing our own podcast. He's got Wrighty's House now. We're guests on it. So it was really organic. And so eventually, him and Roscoe, who kind of manages his management, his agent, they were like, do you want to work with Ian on this book? And I was like, I'd love to. So that was it, really.
How important do you think it is for Ian to have people like you? You're obviously a black man. There's so many things that you can relate with in terms of the sport and how race is linked with football. How important is it that Ian has people like you that he can trust, do you think, in the world of journalism?
It's funny, Ian is, he's got a range of friends. And I think the one thing they've all got in common, whatever race they're from, background, whatever, sexuality, is they're very real with him. So, but none of these things work if you don't, critique things or work on stuff. And I think he really respects people who are just real with him. And I think we became friends at a time where he could see my track record in terms of how I'd handled race in football. He knew from stuff I'd done before in the political journalism, commentary, not so much journalism as commentary. He was like, this is someone who is who he says he is. And I think just it's like any team, right? He just knew he could rely on me. And I think the race aspect helps because so much of Ian's career, people have tried to put him in a box make him into a caricature. But, Ian, yeah, he's got a great laugh. Yeah, he's funny, but like, he's extremely smart. And I think working with people who are not necessarily just black, but race sensitive, for example, like Ryan Hunn work on Stadio. Ryan is an amazing human being. He's white, he's from Manchester actually, but he's as racially sensitive as a person as you could imagine that wasn't black themselves, in terms of having an awareness of the nuance of the issues. And I think that Ian feels quite secure in that environment, if I may be sort of so bold. So yeah.
And in terms of the book itself, obviously there's a lot of Ian in it, but how much of you is in the book, do you think?
Okay, so there's a lot of people in the book. So there's a lot of Ian. There's a bit of Jadon Sancho, because Jadon Sancho went to boarding school when he was at Watford. There's a bit of Marcus Rashford with the social media, like self-awareness. In terms of the bits of me, I would say that I went to boarding school. So Jerome's isolation I could tap into because I knew about that. I knew what it was to go to a school where you're given great opportunity, but there's also the lurking nature of structural and interpersonal racism. And the type of racism you receive in a private school can be different from the type you get out and about, because it's more covert and it's more strategic and more deadly. It's like a poison gas that you can't smell. So there's a lot of, I guess the book is like an amalgam of like 3 or 4 different experiences, primarily Ian, a bit of the kind of other footballers that have made it, a bit of Raheem Sterling, and a little bit of me.
And when you're writing about those experiences, is it almost quite cathartic that you get to write about that?
Do you know what? Actually, therapy is cathartic. I would not say the book was a cathartic experience, because I went to therapy and I never wanted to be someone that was healing through my writing. Because I think a lot of the time, and this is not a criticism of people that do that, I think there's a big danger, especially a lot of young men, we try to like make the world heal us through our writing or through our relationships. A lot of men will be like, they'll use their partner as someone to heal through them. And I was like, I want to do all my healing through my therapy. And when I'm writing, I'm just writing. So when I was writing this book, it wasn't like I was writing each scene and going, oh my goodness, I got that out of my system. It was like, I'm describing a thing that happened to a young boy, a young black boy who did not get the support he deserved. And by doing it that way, it's less about me and more about the story.
And how important do you think that is to detach yourself from it, so that the reader, it is for them in a way?
It's important for everyone. It's important for everyone, Miriam. Like, so, writers are going to have a long career, so we need to take care of ourselves and be gentle with ourselves. If you always push yourself to the emotional edge, each book, it's not sustainable. I see a lot of people talk about the writing process being miserable. Look, it's hard to write. It should be difficult, technically, but it shouldn't be a misery. And in terms of how it is for the reader, it's important to have some emotion in the work, but I feel like it's being a doctor doing a diagnosis. You want to, the less detached you are to a certain extent, of course you put some soul in there, but if you can get a bit of detachment in there, it's a bit like having a patient that you care about. You are going to diagnose them and take care of them and be gentle with them, but you're also detached in the sense that you're not going to be weeping with them. If someone's got stage 4 cancer, it doesn't serve you to be like, oh my goodness, how awful you've got stage 4. No, they need you to be strong for them. So in a sense, you want to be strong for the reader as a writer. That's how I felt.
And how different is it writing fiction compared to writing like a political essay or something about race and football?
No, it's a great question. No, it's a great question. So like in both cases, you've got a sense of where you want to end up. So I wrote a political essay about racism in football for The Guardian prior to the Euro semi-final against Denmark. That was very much a sense of, I want people to be on board with what I'm saying, but also feel like football is the most important thing. I don't want these people to feel like I'm hijacking football just to talk about racism. I want them to feel like this is a guy that loves it. So I wrote that in a very particular way, and I structured it very much A to B. Whereas this children's book was like, it was the technique of the hero's journey. So I wanted Jerome to sort of set out from a certain place with a quest, have a mentor, abandon the mentor, find himself again, reconnect with the mentor, and then have the kind of peril, then the catharsis. So like so it's almost like Greek dramas, I love that you asked this question, because there's such a clear structure to everything that I do. And obviously with the book, it was very different to the political context.
And when you are like sitting down to write something, it seems like it is very structured and kind of like a science on how you talk about it. Do you ever just get writer's block, or do you always know what you want to say?
I do get writer's block, and when I do, I think it's a really good thing, Miriam, because I think when you get that, it's an invitation to go out and enjoy the world again, sample new things, catch up with people, cook yourself a nice meal, change your pace, and then the ideas come back. Your creativity is like it's a well. You've got to replenish it. So when you replenish the well and you sit and you think about what you really want to write, what you find is, as a writer, the same ideas keep occurring to you. Like if you work on a story idea that's really strong in your mind, over the next few weeks, like, oh, that character's speaking to me again. I need to get that down on paper. And so actually, in a way, the stories they announce themselves after a while. So yeah, and then you can structure them however you want.
And you just mentioned about the mentoring in the story. How important do you think like the role of a mentor is within the book and for you as well in your writing career?
Oh, it's huge. So for a mentor, like Ian as a mentor, just to give you an example of that, for those who don't listen to the Writers' House podcast, when Romelu Lukaku was deciding which club to move to in Italy, he spoke to Ian and was like, Inter or Juve, and Ian was like, to quote, like, Conte has always loved you, bro. Like, Conte loves you. And that was like, it was important because Lukaku was basically like, this is someone that understands what it is to be in a dressing room at an elite level. So the mentoring from Ian's perspective is huge, what he's done for other footballers. For me, like, my dad died very young. I never really had a mentor in writing. So I almost wrote this from the perspective of how would it be to have had someone to look out for you the whole time. And when Ian and I did the plot, when we talked through it, we basically like talked through the entire plot. We were like, what journey is Jerome going to go over? When are you going to come in? And I said, Ian, like when you come into his life, how would you have responded to a guy coming into your life like this to mentor you? And Ian was like, I might not have been able to accept the love immediately. So actually, Jerome rejects Ian at first, in a way. Like when it really comes down to it, they're friendly, but when it comes down to it, Jerome rejects Ian because he's not been able to accept the love. So mentoring is so important, not only to have a mentor, but to have one. What's the lyric by Dave when Dave goes, it ain't about who came around, it's more about who stayed around. And the mentor stays around. So yeah.
And those conversations sound like amazing. Like, did you record any of those?
Do you know what we didn't? It's so wild. Like we didn't, the conversations are so funny because there was so much to and fro about what it should be. And Ian said something I'll never forget. The first thing he said is, this book needs to be like therapy for Black people. Therapy, like in the sense that, because not everyone can afford therapy or counselling. And of course, this book is for everyone. It's for children. It's for all people. At the same time, there is a very particular strand where it's like, he wanted Jerome and people like Jerome to feel seen. And going from the beginning, I was like, okay, this is the one. And then we talked about music, about food, about church. I said, we need to celebrate things in this, but we need to celebrate a lot of things. There needs to be a lot of happiness, community, friendship, faith, all of that. That needs to go in there too.
And how important is that? Because so much of what we see when Black people are represented, especially when it's linked to football at the moment, is like Black trauma and racism. And it's not always, like, it's so heavy to have to read about that for people. So how important was it to you both, like from the start, that it had like the positives of the culture and everything you just mentioned in it?
Absolutely. Because look, the trauma, like, look, if you are Black and working class in any country in the world, it's difficult to escape trauma. Let's just be real. So you have to have that. That's the denial of reality if you're writing about this story. But at the same time, like, people ask me, my favorite chapter is when Jerome goes to the seaside with his football team from church, his old team from church. And that whole thing it's my favorite chapter because each chapter is like a short film, but that one in particular just shows you how much love there is for Jerome. Like he hasn't seen him for such a long time, but it's almost like it's the prodigal son, actually. That scene is the prodigal. There's a lot of bits and there's a lot of like Easter eggs in the book where if you're like religious or you listen to certain music, or if you're like, hang on a minute, like, for example, like each of the parts of the book are named after a song from Ian's Desert Island Discs. And they're also themed after that. And so people are like, hang on a minute, is that what I think it is? It's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So there's lots of treats of celebrations buried in the book, which are like, if you find them, like it's even more joyful.
And what's it like since the book's been out, obviously like your name is so like prominent as well on the cover, which feels like kind of rare, like especially for footballers and writers to have the kind of relationship that you guys have. So yeah. What's it been like for you since it's come out?
It changed my life. Ian changed my life with this. He changed my career because, look, I'm a respected writer. I know that. I do have respect. I'm not trying to say in an arrogant way. I have my respect, but the visibility that it gave my work, a lot of writers we work with people of Ian's profile, we get discarded. We don't get like the respect, the name check, like, and he was very emphatic about that. He was like, I believe and I trust you can help me tell this story. And in terms of recognition, it's been unreal. But also there's things like getting emails from, like, I got a text last night from an old friend from uni I've known for like 20 years. And he said, this is what my son thought of the book. He's too cool. He's too cool to say it himself or do a voice note or a video message. But this is what he thinks. And he was like, it's the kind of book you'd really enjoy, even if you didn't like football. And even the grim scenes, even the most difficult scenes in relation to race and emotional abuse at home, he said they felt so real, like they could have been true. So yeah, it's been amazing. It's allowed me to reach an audience I never would have reached otherwise.
Well, you say it, but I feel like a lot of your work that's about football really like transcends the sport and like reaches people that probably don't know much about football but can learn a lot from your writing. So I feel like that's something you do naturally anyway.
Oh, that means a lot. No, it's funny you should say that. I mean, there's a funny thing happened because when we were doing the book signing in London, someone turned up with one of my other books to sign. They're like, oh, like, I really like it. And I was like, wow, like someone knows my stuff. And Ian was like, dude, shut up. He's like, people know you. He's like, he was like, do you know what it is? Do you know what it is? Miriam, do you know what it is? It's like years of having been a poet. You're like, poets who get ignored. So you're still used to that. You're still used to not being, and also being in Germany, being in Berlin. It's not that I don't get respect for my work. I do, but it's more like it's more removed because you're not around football people. You're not really seeing the conversations they're having. So yes, it's really nice to feel appreciated, which I do.
Do you think that helps your writing being in Berlin?
Yes. Look, you can never get too big a head if people that like what you're doing are in short supply. It just can't happen. You just got to get on. You got to get on with it. Do you know what I mean? So, like, not Berlin. No one cares. Like, no one cares. Like, when they came to film Inglourious Basterds here a few years ago, and what they loved about it, the cast, like Brad Pitt was here, Tarantino was here. Nobody cared because they're just like, this is Berlin. So like, they don't care about them. No one cares about me. And so you can't get caught up in like the football scene, like who's doing cool stuff here and there. You're just not part of it. So all you've got is your friends and the work. It's really healthy. And
in terms of just, I don't know, maybe a bit of advice for other writers, like I personally write a lot about race in sport and about equality. And sometimes I feel like there's a worry that I'm going to be like pigeonholed, or not that I don't want to write about it. Like I always want to write about it because I feel like a lot of people don't and they ignore it. But yeah, I feel like sometimes people can pigeonhole you into just like they're talking about race.
It's one of the reasons I left the country. One of the reasons I left the country, because I was like, like my first book, A Cultured Left Foot, is about what makes a great footballer. And a few years later, all they're getting in touch to ask about is race in football. I was like, I'm out of here. I'm not going to be your race guy. Like I'm so much. It's like if a fish studies molecular biology and all you ever ask a fish about is water. And the fish is like, really? I've got a PhD in molecular biology. I don't, but like, it's like, I'm an expert in something else. Yeah. And it's a bit demeaning after a while, Miriam. Like, feminism in football. I'm like, why don't men talk about it? Like, why don't men talk about misogyny in football? Like, you're the ones doing the misogyny. Like, and so I think, Miriam, the way I would get around it is always make your own work. So I have my own platform. I've got to set up my website again. It's down at the moment, but always make your own platform. Always, you have your own blog, your own videos, whatever, about the stuff that you really care about. I don't know. Are you a PSG fan? I don't know if that is your team.
I did French at uni, so
you're just wearing it because it's me. You're wearing because it's a vibe. It's a vibe.
Also, it's like the coolest shirt I've ever seen. I'm like obsessed with this shirt, and I got it pre-Messi as well. So that
it's dangerously cool. The PSG stuff. I mean, the designers know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I would say, like, I mean, what are your teams? What's your team? What are your passions in football?
So I only support Chelsea women. I kind of boycotted men's football when I was really young because of racism I heard towards my dad, basically.
Oh wow. Tell you what, Chelsea women team, we'll talk about that, like, because, oh my goodness, we could talk all day. We won't. I won't bore you with it. But see, like that, I think to completely break away from any pigeonholing, really take the central passion of yours and write about it in a way that only you can. So write about your specific love for Chelsea women, what it is about, maybe it could be the front three, or the fact that like Guru writing is so underrated. Guru writing, oh my God, what a footballer. Like, yeah, like stuff like that. Or like Sophie Ingle just holding it down, like, like all of those, choose the thing that you love most about Chelsea women and write about that in the way that only you can, and bring your experience into it, bring your reading into it, your French at uni into it, bring in like, you know, that the thing about the French language, for example, the fact that French language is like, it's not like German where you can figure out what a word means by looking at it. French is impenetrable. If you go to France, go to a town like Limoges, and you can't work out the surrounding towns because they're all connected by weird routes and roads, and the French language is like the French. You're right, exactly. So basically take your love of France language and culture, take your love of like Chelsea women, and then any other thing you'll listen to, and combine that. And that is the DNA of your writing. And if you have a DNA for your writing, no one can divert you, because if you get forced off that path, you get forced away from your DNA, you're like, listen, I'm talking too much about race this week. I need to get back to the DNA. So the key is to establish your voice as a writer, as a woman of colour, as a queer person, whoever you are. Identify your DNA. That's the most crucial thing, because no matter how people try to pigeonhole you, they can't force you off the path. That is the most important thing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like no one's ever said anything like that, and it's like, now you said it, it makes so much sense.
Do you know what I mean? Because that's what makes you you. Like I don't have a football team in Germany. I do go and watch the Wolfsburg women's team actually quite a lot, because it's around the corner, and 5,000 people. It's an amazing vibe. 8-year-olds up to 80, queer couples there, older couples, like, you know, heterosexual couples, and they're such lovely people. I mean, it's a woefully undermarketed team, but the individuals like Alex Pop's won like 3-4 Champions Leagues. Like, you've got people who are just, that expertise is right there. And the women's game is so incredible because it's been built from the ground up against the odds. It's been built from the ground up with the values that the men's game lost a long time ago. So I think the more you lean into your love for the game, the infrastructure, the team, and also you've got the great Emma Hayes. I mean, we could talk all day about Emma Hayes. Just lean into your love for it. And it's not about build it and they will come, because it's not about building and them coming. It's not about that. It's about you do you. And I can say from experience, when I started writing what I was writing, a lot of people just disregarded it, laughed at it. I mean, death threats, abuse, everything. And it shifted slowly in my direction. And now, from being in the wilderness, people just respect what we're doing with the podcast and with the writing. So, yeah.
It's tiring, isn't it? How people treat people who want to make a change. Like,
oh my goodness. I didn't have a breakthrough for so long. And when I met Ryan to work on Stadio, he's going to hate me for saying this, but he can't stop me because I'm on a different... He normally edits stuff out in the podcast, but Ryan, when I met Ryan, we became friends, I was 6 months from quitting football writing. Because I was like, people don't rate me. Like, I'm not getting... It's just race and football. Like, people don't rate me. And it was really heartbreaking. And Ryan was like, what the hell are you talking about? He was like, do you know, like, how good your stuff is? And I was like, oh, no. And I was completely down on myself, actually. And Ryan, so we had that conversation. Then 3 months later, the New York Times got in touch after chatting with Ryan, and they were like, we want you to write the newsletter for the 2018 World Cup. And that changed my life. And they said, I'm not allowed to say this, but I'll say it anyway. They said that newsletter, it broke all the records, projections they were expecting. They were like, it's one of the most successful newsletters in the history of the New York Times, like online newsletters. And they were like, I was 6 months from quitting. And the two people, and that's Max Strasser, my editor at the New York Times, who was at Foreign Policy, did my stuff there, and Ryan Hunn, two men that got in touch out of the blue 6 months before quitting. Yeah. And this football can do that to you, Miriam. That's the thing. So if your work doesn't get picked up, it's not because you're not good enough. It's never been about that. It's never been about that. Because you know what? If it was about that, if we were mediocre and we're not mediocre, we'd be laughing. It's about something else. The last piece of work I did for a big organisation in the UK was the BBC World Service. With the great producer Jim Frank, we did a thing called The Burden of Beauty. It was a 2-part documentary about the World Cup in Brazil, and I'm so proud of it. Jim is an amazing producer. We selected all the music. Shout out to Amon Tobin, put all that stuff in there. And I loved it. It was a great experience, and it also made me realise that the work I would have to make going forward would be on my own platforms. Because Jim is such a brilliant producer, and at the same time, it was like, how many times you get to work with a Jim Frank? Like someone who's just so brilliant, creative, special. And I thought, if you go and work with someone in a different capacity, I'm like Ryan, you can work with a guy like Jim Frank every single week. So I get to work with Ryan every single week on Stadio. We built our own platform, and now it's so wild how it all worked out, actually, Miriam. When we first set up Stadio, I said, the first offer we're going to get is going to be from America. And he was like, how do you know? I said, trust me, like, for some reason, American media have just got what I'm doing. And a friend of mine passed away 2 months ago, the late, great Richard Diffenthal, amazing lawyer. He said to me 14 years ago, they don't understand you in the UK, you should be working with Bill Simmons. And 14 years later, I'm working with Bill Simmons at The Ringer.
Thank you so much, Musa, for the whole chat. And I know everyone here is really delighted to have you on this. So thank you very much. And for writing the book.
Oh, thanks. Honestly, it was an absolute pleasure. I wrote it during the pandemic, actually, the lockdown. The bulk of it was written in November. And so actually a lot of people had a tough time in the lockdown. I get that. And that was brutal. I think for me, it made my November really easy because November in Berlin is dark. No one's doing anything anyway. So I was just like, you know what? Get down to it. You got the plot. You and Ian have chatted it out. So just like fill in the gaps. And that was what I did, just filled in the gaps. It was great fun.
Incredible. Love it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And we will chat soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. A
huge thanks for joining us at this Football Writing Festival talk. We've got a full week of author events and panel discussions, so check those out on our channel too. And for more information about the festival, head to nationalfootballmuseum.com. Thanks for watching and see you again soon.